A few weeks ago, I highlighted that Nintendo would need to double down on the online service on or around the 25th of October, including potentially launching their own music app. I've actually flagged this date in videos going way back, but the particular risk faced by Nintendo this October was always a cliff edge of a lot of people opting out of the Nintendo Switch Online service. The reason is that this was the anniversary of a lot of people purchasing the expansion pack, and therefore many core NSO users upgrading and restarting their memberships. Whenever there are large numbers of people who could potentially opt out of your service, it makes sense to chuck them a sweetener. There's another, probably smaller, cliff edge around February when more people might have upgraded in 2023 for the Game Boy Advance games, and I think there's a 50% chance that we will see Nintendo make another announcement to push the service around then. However, I think the Nintendo Music revelation really is the cherry on top of a massive push for their online service, but more than that, it's a test run of the kind of facilities we can expect them to use in 2025. Before we dive into Nintendo Music specifically, let's review what we've had over the last few weeks. First, we had Alamo, which was available first to NSO subscribers. This allowed Nintendo to demonstrate that NSO could be used to allow some level of early access to purchase hardware, with the tantalizing possibilities of that hardly worth developing for their hardcore Switch successor hungry audience. Now, Alamo is obviously not going to attract the same massive numbers as the next system will hope to achieve out of the gate, but there are benefits to this. They can test out the physical processes they have in place with a much lower stakes purchase than a new console. For one thing, they were able to constantly stress test their security protocols. This is obviously far easier when no external distributors can get their hand on it before 2025, but it's still useful for Nintendo. But the data they are acquiring does not end there. Nintendo can also see what proportion of their core user base can be converted to making purchases through their NSO membership. Now, does this mean we can expect timed exclusivity for the next console for NSO subscribers? Cool as that would be, I am 90% certain that they will not do that. Apart from the fact that it would put out of joint the noses of retail partners, apart from the fact that Nintendo is unlikely to have the kind of infrastructure to support direct distribution on such a vast scale, it would encourage all sorts of security issues. However, I can see as a 70% likelihood Nintendo either guaranteeing availability to NSO subscribers by holding back a sizable number, or perhaps simply going down the lottery route of allowing a limited number of people to enter to win the chance to own a new system. How could they allow limited numbers access though? Well, here we have their second experiment, the global playtest. Before we get to the actual playtest itself, note that they had a chance to demonstrate how their system worked when people were signing up to something very mysterious and yet with huge hype. Clearly not everybody got in and they didn't want this to happen, but they were able to get at least some sense of the scale of people's interest, and moreover, they tested that their systems were robust for this purpose. It would seem a little harsh, frankly, if they use the same kind of process for dishing out the next console, where people would need to be online at a particular time for a vague chance of getting a shot at purchasing one. Still, I think there will be people at Nintendo Systems who are pleased that they can handle a large amount of stress on their systems. But of course, the playtest did more than demonstrate this. I won't discuss the specific details of what was being played until Nintendo reveal it, although I think it's safe to say that as well as testing something new in itself, this had the fringe benefit that it provided a huge testbed for online interactive services. This has so many angles to it that needed testing out, including most significantly Nintendo's moderation procedures, but also just how different people were able to interact using the online service. And of course, all these systems will have multiple benefits going forward for Nintendo, as we saw with the revelation of Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. And by the way, is it just me that's sad that they couldn't call it Director's Cut so the game could be given the more pleasing acronym XCXDX? Anyway, a game with an MMO-style feature allows another gradual step forward in terms of Nintendo being able to stress test their system. The fact that this is with a niche but dedicated franchise is helpful. They can probably expect around 1 to 2 million sales in the first few weeks, and if 20% of these people use the online mode, they will need to ensure that their procedures can manage hundreds of thousands of people this time. This is a step up from the 10,000 people from the test play, and if the next console launches with another game which has a lot of heavy online features, they will need to be able to handle perhaps 1 million in short order. You can see the stepping stones in place to ramp up their technological capabilities. Now, I've skipped one key feature, which is of course the revelation of Banjo-Tooie. And look, while Nintendo is showing what Nintendo Switch Online can do, it is important that they don't lose their core audience who are on NSO for the cool retro games either. But of course, there was another major revelation this week, specifically Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete Edition. And note that they encourage people here to sign up to Nintendo accounts. Now, I'm skeptical about Animal Crossing on the new Nintendo system early on. I think Animal Crossing has always complemented the cheaper handheld consoles, and especially if Nintendo risks shortages early on, then requiring one console per town makes Animal Crossing seem like kind of a nightmare launch title. I also think the nature of Splatoon is that they want to be able to release new iterations as often as possible, and while the Animal Crossing and Splatoon developers have become increasingly independent from each other over the Switch era, the two games still do come from the same stable, EPT5, and one might expect Splatoon to be their focus in the medium term. All that said, bringing mobile players into the Nintendo account system opens them up to graduate to the main console, and I do wonder whether there will be some kind of new title with the Animal Crossing brand by the end of 2026, whether it be another mobile title or spin-off, if not a full new game. This feels like a 50% chance to me at this point, since it would mark a point that Pocket Camp players could graduate to something new. Yet again, the more people that are linked into Nintendo systems, the better it is for them. But it's one thing to have an account, it's another to be connected with people's day-to-day lives in a major way, and this is where Nintendo Music comes in. You see, now Nintendo have not just the details of people's Switch system activities, but they also know which mobile phones people are connecting up to them. They also know which people are engaging with Nintendo content weekly and daily, not just in terms of the games, but through the music. And the Nintendo Music app makes use of push notifications. The first notice that comes up says, if you enable push notifications, you will receive alerts about recent highlights in the music selection and other promotional materials. By default, you are opted in to receive promotional notifications. What does this mean? Well, it means that Nintendo just hacked itself a shortcut to whisper into the phones of their biggest fans, because sure, they're not going to abuse it. Generally, this is going to be about new music being added, and of course they tested this out by adding the Super Mario Bros. Wonder music early on. But the disclaimer is not limited to music. In fact, the wording specifically incorporates other promotional material. As a result, it's easier than ever for Nintendo to get in contact with their fan base. I think there is a 90% chance that this will be used for something other than music content within the next year. Whether it's for Nintendo Directs or other advertisements or deals remains to be seen, but it's a massive expansion of Nintendo's capacity to reach people, where once they were setting up the online infrastructure in order to drive people towards their consoles, now they're using their consoles to drive people towards their account system so that everything can be integrated together. As an aside from this video, it's also noticeable which games are featured on the Nintendo Music service. Obviously, there is a huge range of iconic titles from the off, as you would expect, and there are also iconic titles held back, as you would also expect. The Wii channel tracks are perhaps the lowest hanging fruit, since they have a nostalgic appeal, but are unlikely to be ones that they can reissue around the launch of new games to appeal to people, because there aren't really any games which directly utilize these tracks. I think it's striking, though, to peruse the list of Switch titles: Animal Crossing New Horizon, Kirby Star Allies, Super Mario Odyssey, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Zelda Breath of the Wild, Pikmin 4, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Splatoon 3, and now Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This is basically a list of Nintendo's biggest franchise exclusives on the Switch system, but a couple of these are quite interesting. Tears of the Kingdom does not make the cut. Now, fair enough, one Zelda focus at a time, but it really seemed like they've cut Tears of the Kingdom off of the kneecaps to keep going back to Breath of the Wild. And the same too with the vastly successful Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which does not yet appear despite having some of my all-time favourite music. Of course, Star Allies is interesting because it did appear a while back on a list of titles that were out of print, at least in America, but here it is back again. My hunch is that they feel they have maxed out Forgotten Land sales, but they can still hope to convert a number of Forgotten Land lovers into being Star Allies purchasers, and so putting this title into people's ears is a way to highlight the pink puffball's underlooked first Switch outing, while of course fulfilling the necessity to have a Kirby game on this music service at launch. It would have been simplicity itself just to do Pikmin 3 music for the utterly overlooked Wii U, just as they let Metroid, Star Fox, Fire Emblem and Donkey Kong be represented by prior system entries. But no, there it is in the midst of the Switch lineup. I have another video coming out about Nintendo's core IPs, but suffice to say that this isn't the only time they've been pushing Pikmin lately, and I think they see a massive future in that franchise. Now, I would expect Nintendo to try to sync up tracks releasing with games, but what you have to wonder is whether they will also try to use this as warm-up marketing for future titles. I have to think that the choices of titles were not complete accidents at all. We have Metroid in 2D and Prime flavors, Dr. Mario, Kirby, Yoshi's Island, Donkey Kong, Star Fox, Fire Emblem, Nintendogs, and Tomodachi, which is pretty much a run-through of their most iconic franchises. I think there's a 70% chance we see Ring Fit music out there within a year, especially if people use Nintendo music for exercise, since it might just inspire people to pick up an actual exercise title off the back of it. Now, the presence of Tomodachi, Nintendogs, and Star Fox may simply be that these are iconic to their systems, but it does show that these franchises at least have Nintendo's attention to some degree. But another thing to consider is whether, as with core NSO, Nintendo will expand their remit by offering tracks from other companies. Sega already have the Mega Drive or Genesis on NSO, so it would be simplicity itself to offer some amazing Sega tracks on the Nintendo Music app if they wished. Any tracks not in legal issues with the Michael Jackson estate anyway. Of course, Sega could do their own app, but it's questionable as to whether they are in a position at the present time to draw people into a unified brand in the same way that Nintendo are. Sure, they could do Sonic Music as their own app, or they could just go down the Spotify route, but if they want to cross-promote franchises with cinematic potential like Shinobi, Streets of Rage, Crazy Taxi and House of the Dead, they may find themselves better placed trying their hand, first of all, with Nintendo. It's easy to imagine this being a mutually beneficial arrangement. The same with Square, Bandai and other companies who might not have the reach to launch a successful music app on their own, but would be happy to utilize Nintendo's service. Of course, it took a while before third-party games came to NSO, so I think it's a 10% chance we will see at least one third-party music track within the first year, so before October 2025, but rising to 30% by the end of 2026 if the service is, as I'm sure it will be, successful. You see, while games are important to Nintendo, the key benefit of this to me is audience engagement, and alongside it, franchise expansion. There are lots of DS games that could have been chosen, including bigger titles, such as Brain Age or a prior Pokemon title. The fact that they chose Tomodachi Collection is striking, and we already have seen a Nintendogs patent for what seems to be a mobile game. I think there is a 70% chance that both a Tomodachi game and a Nintendogs game emerge by the end of 2026, and a 90% chance that one or other of them do in the same time period. So look, Nintendo have managed to make some major chess moves with regard to their online. They subtly but hugely raised the profile of Nintendo Switch Online, test run its capacity to deliver online game services and to distribute hardware, nudged people into signing up for accounts, enticed people to load Nintendo onto their phones, and to enable promotional push notifications, all the while, they will hope, ensuring that subscribers keep forking over the cash for another year of what is likely to be their driest year for a while in terms of AAA gaming goodness. I think they can be quite smug. Incidentally, I will say that I don't expect the Nintendo Music service to come to the Switch too soon. I do think it will happen eventually, but at the moment, the clear benefit is in connecting this system to people's phones, and so I think there is only a 10% chance that we will see this come to the Nintendo Switch by the end of the calendar year, and only a 30% chance that we will see it on game consoles by the end of 2025. It just is too valuable as a way to link up to people's phones. However, there is one other aspect to consider with regard to Nintendo Music. Nintendo has previously claimed music tracks shared online, but their guidelines for content usage, including for YouTube creators, was quite positive as of the last change in November 2018. On using their media, they specifically say, "We encourage you to create videos that include your creative input and commentary. Videos and images that contain mere copies of Nintendo game content without creative input or commentary are not permitted. You may, however, post gameplay videos and screenshots using Nintendo system features such as the capture button on Nintendo Switch without additional input or commentary." However, I think they will need to rethink these rules with respect to music at some point in the future. I'm not saying that day will be today or tomorrow, but it probably won't be 5 or 10 years away either. After all, the rules don't specifically address music usage at all, except insofar as the games have music, but many YouTube channels have used Nintendo Music as a way to support that creative commentary. I no longer think that is a wise move, and you'll notice that for a video focused on music, the background is noticeably silent. I'm going to experiment with some different musical cues or none over the next few weeks, and do tell me what you prefer, but I think there's a 30% chance in the next 12 months that Nintendo will look to revise or clarify their rules, including around music use, and I don't think it will be in terms of liberalizing things for content creators. Note that in the recent Palworld lawsuit, Nintendo tried but failed to use a copyright defense, and one risk is that their content is out there in the world to be used by artificial intelligence sampling, and yet Nintendo aren't, it would seem, aggressively asserting their claim over it if it's being used in YouTube content like this. It's also the case that just logistically, they will need to reassert their legal right over these tracks as part of setting up Nintendo Music, and you can bet that Nintendo's Japanese lawyers will dot the I's and cross the tetronomos. I think Nintendo tends to be rigorous and literal with its interpretations of its terms, quite fair on them, and the widespread use of video game music in the background of YouTube videos is something I think they will consider problematic if and when it comes to their attention. After all, their existing guidelines note that you should take legal advice of your own, and that they are guidelines, not strict rules. Basically, Nintendo have the leeway to change any of this at any time. Now, I suspect that a reason for them to slow their roll is that, as it stands, their enforcement paths are limited. They can, of course, register the songs with YouTube, and YouTube has methods of pulling these out, but this is not in their interest, certainly at this point, since it will likely take down enthusiastic fan videos using gameplay footage completely within their rules. Similarly, I'm sure they don't have the capacity to independently review and verify every Nintendo-themed video on the internet, and it would surely be too paranoid to think that their actions to curb the spread of gameplay test footage and commentary was a test of their capabilities in this regard, although, whether planned or not, I'm sure they will review how successful they were and what strategies benefited them most as part of their usual review and strategizing process. Furthermore, I'm sure that Nintendo are in discussions with social media companies to explore their options, and of course, just as artificial intelligence has been a headache to them with Palworld, it may provide assistance to them in the future. This will be a marathon and not a sprint, but I expect that, when they're confident, they will want to ensure that their music is used in a manner that fits within the least expansive interpretation of their guidelines. The ideal time to finalise any changes would be ahead of the new system releasing, but I think this is unlikely. Apart from anything else, this would mean poking their fan base with a stick, just as they want maximum hype which is unwise and frankly unnecessary. Their last major revision of their rules was after the release of the Switch, nearly 2 years after in fact, and I do think the wheels will grind slowly. I think there's only a 10% chance that there will be any takedown video of channels utilising background music on videos which complied with Nintendo's guidelines before the end of 2025. However, my hunch is that Nintendo's rules around music will become stricter, and I'm 70% sure that they will have something to say about this by the end of 2027, by which time the Nintendo Music Service will be very well established. Because of this, I'm going to think carefully about how and when I utilise music in videos going forward. I am also looking carefully at past content and how to handle this. For now though, it remains for me just to say thank you so much for watching. Do check out some of these classic Nintendo Forecast videos on the screen right now, and I look forward to seeing you all again for another Nintendo Forecast.